I'd really like to congratulate everybody who has been a part of the Quasar journey, and we have become the single largest research unit for the shoulder research in the whole world. And this is not possible without every single one of you who has contributed to, I don't think any research unit in the world can publish 50 papers in 1 year and have over 129 podium presentations. So a big round of applause to everybody, please. I've actually got a cheat sheet for today because I have a very distinguished group of people here, so I thought I'd better remind myself. So I'm not going to introduce anyone, so the game plan is going to be a bit different. Everyone's going to introduce themselves. You get 3 minutes to introduce yourself. I'll start. So my name is Ashish. Most of you know me. Ashish is a Sanskrit word which means blessing or the blessed one. I was born in India. I don't know, 50 years ago maybe, plus or minus. And I come from a generation of 4 generations of doctors in my family, most of who were academics and who worked in public practice. My grandparents survived the partition in India. For those who don't know, 3 million people died in that. It was more than the Holocaust. But that inspired a lot of public health in my family, and my grandfather, Dr. Jolly, who I named my son after, started transfusion medicine. And he was the first person in the world to say that blood needs to be tested for hepatitis and HIV in 1981. And he started the voluntary blood donation program. And he's passed on now, but 1st of October is his birthday, which is known as the International Blood Donation Day. So that legacy has led to me to always think of the bigger picture as to how we can bring about change and how change can come over. And when I started my journey in Australia, there are certain things in life which define who you are. When I was in med school, my brother got really sick. He almost died. He needed to be medevaced to a different country. Sadly, he still survives. But at that point of time in life, you really realize how medicine is not equitable, where if you don't have access to resources and access to services, you can really lose a very cherished person in your life very, very quickly. Since then, our journey with Quasar and our family journey with cancers is brought to the stage where, for me, the purpose of my life is to make sure that whatever I do, I can help the patient. And the journey with the Kuna is it doesn't matter where that patient is, they can get best evidence-based care for themselves. So that's me, that's my journey, that's what ticks me, that's what my purpose in life is. We'll start with Lynn, and you can introduce yourself and we'll end up with Greg.
Hi, I'm a distinguished professor here at QUT, and my area is molecular genetics. So what drives me? I think from a young age, I always wanted to be in the health area. Didn't quite have the stamina to be a doctor. I preferred to actually do something about health and make a difference to it. So really what drives me, I'm quite passionate about medical research, but more than that, translating medical research. I think we do some absolutely fantastic medical research in Australia, and I think we're ranked number 5 in the world, but we have this real gap, and the gap is we don't seem to take it beyond the fantastic publications and the great research, and my passion is to try and help to drive that along. So as part of that, I currently run quite a large lab with about 30 people in it, and I'm head of a Centre of Genomics and Personalised Health. I undertake research to try and track down genes in disease, but I translate it by having a NATA-accredited diagnostics lab. So my lab undertakes diagnostic tests right across Australia for all the hereditary strokes, for ataxias, which are movement disorders, epilepsies, and severe migraine-related disorders as well. So that's translation. As we identify more genes, we translate that through more tests and make those available. The other side, to try and help other people translate, is I've been head of 2 programs. One's called the Bridge program, which is all about commercialisation training for the pharmaceutical industry, and its sister program's the Bridge Tech program. That's a commercialisation training program for those in the med technology, med devices, and also the diagnostics area. They've been running for 7 years and 6 years respectively. I can thank Greg Hunt for being a supporter right from the beginning, but also the industry partners. It's supported by MTP Connect, half, and the other half by industry. Happy to discuss it more, but my passion is to try and get people to think about translation and the best way to do it, and certainly working with industry is that way.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vu. I'm one of the co-founders of a company, a proudly Queensland-founded and headquartered company called Go1. We're based in Logan. We do workplace education and learning. My claim to fame is that I'm Ashish's former intern when at the Royal Brisbane Hospital when I was an intern back in 2012. Ashish was my boss, so that's why I'm here today. Go1 is a company I started with my best mates from high school. We've been running it, pretty much our entire adult lives. It's about a $3.5 billion company. We're based in Logan. That's where all our team are. We've got about a team of about 800 people spread across 22 countries globally, though. For us at Go1, one of our biggest things, and Kate, when you were a minister, you know that's something we're very passionate about, is that we should be able to do everything that we want to be able to do from here in Queensland, whether it's about building great companies, doing great research, commercialising it, and doing everything in between, which is why I really love what Ashish and the team and everyone here involved has and is doing.
Thank you, Vu. And my name is Kate Jones. It's great to be back at QUT. This is where I did my undergrad, and wonderful to be in the real world. But also, for background, for those that don't know me, I was a minister in the Queensland government for more than 8 years in a range of portfolios, including innovation, state development, education, Commonwealth Games, which seems to be a bit of a dead thing these days, and also part of the Olympic Candidature Committee. So for me, in the context of today, I'm now on the Tech Council of Australia, so really pushing for regulatory reform and policy reform to enable all the issues that we've already talked about today and we'll talk about on the panel. I also work with your surviving brother, Anuj, and the K&G group with Greg, and really for me, I've got 5 brothers actually, so I had a tough childhood in a different way, but I grew up wanting to make a difference. For me, I wish I thought I'd be a doctor, but I thought I was going to become a politician. Don't know why I thought that at 9 is a great idea, but it was, if you go back to the late 80s in Queensland, you'll have an idea about why I would think that being a politician would be a good idea. And for me, I had this moment after being in politics for more than 20 years that I could see as Education Minister, as Innovation Minister, that tech was the future and that we had a choice as a community, as a country, as a state, that we're either going to embrace this journey, skill up our people, resource that, get the policy settings right or not. And so I thought on a selfish level too that if I didn't get on this bandwagon that it was going to happen to me and I wouldn't be part of that story. So I'm very excited that I was approached to be one of the founding members of the Tech Council of Australia, which now has 160 members, and we're now 3 years old. Our chair is Robin Denham, the global chair of Tesla, and a number of other unicorn company founders. So it's a really exciting time. I'm very pleased to be here with all of these esteemed panellists.
Hello, I'm Chris Wendt. I'm actually here representing, I guess, the hospitals where all these things happen. I've been a CEO for a number of years, and that's how I got involved with Ashish, very persistent Ashish, who was at my office frequently trying to get things happening with becoming an industry partner, and it's been amazing. It's an amazing journey, and it's really important, I guess, as an industry in healthcare that we are able to grasp new technology and be able to make it work for our patients, and that's really important to us, that our patients get the best outcomes and we look good as facilities that have those patients in them. So it's a really important thing to be involved in this, and yeah, I'm really grateful for Ashish being so persistent back then.
I'd like to introduce Greg, and he'll introduce himself more, but there's a special thanks from all of us here that I, for one, was kept safe and our families were kept safe because of the COVID response, which Australia shined throughout the world. And rightly or wrongly, so it wouldn't be possible without Greg and his team, which led that and which negotiated and got all the vaccines to us and everything else. So as a healthcare professional who were all at the front line with our borders closed, going to the rugby, I'm sure you were not enjoying that time and you were having sleepless nights while we were at Suncorp Stadium when there were calamities happening in, Rome and New York and everywhere. So Greg, really thank you for that. And really warm welcome to Quasar and to everybody here.
So,
Tell us what ticks you, though.
well, look, to Ashish, to Lynn and to Vu, to Kate and to Chris, but most importantly, to all of you here who are involved in the health profession and also our emerging young tech leaders. And I was greeted by a lot of black T-shirts, and I actually had breakfast this morning with Ashish, who was in his sort of navy blue T-shirt, and I found that very liberating, so I've ditched my tie. And in the spirit of liberation, I'm going to cheat. I'm not going to tell my story. I'm going to talk a little bit about your story and our story. You mentioned the pandemic. And when you go back 3.5 years, every single one of us lived the pandemic in different ways. But it was not just a universal Queensland or Australian, but a universal global experience. It was, in many ways, one of the defining global events of the last century outside of conflict. And so against that background, when you mention, Rome and New York, which in many ways was the sort of capital of the world, not in a political sense, but in a magnetic sense, in a financial sense, was picking up those that had been lost and burying them in open graves. Madrid, Milan, London, Paris, the health systems collapsed in all of those areas. And so against that background, we knew this was coming to Australia, but we were able to forestall it, but it was inevitable. And so you talk about technological change and what drives us. What we could see at that time was that technology, driven by people such as yourselves, gave us the prospect of bringing a whole new modality for delivering health, digital and telehealth to Australians. But as Kate will tell you, finance departments are lovely but slow, and they don't like to spend money. So we had a 10-year plan to bring telehealth to being standard of care in Australia. But circumstances meant that in order to keep primary health care safe, in order to keep our hospitals running and aged care, we were able to switch in 10 days at the end of March 2020 to a national telehealth system. And we never went back. That may have been a secret plan at the time. And I remember talking to the PM and the Treasurer about 2 months into it and said, we're not going back. This is a new paradigm, which is, the only silver lining of COVID. And the combination of healthcare, technology, circumstance, and decision-making meant that we were able to jump a decade in the way in which we deliver healthcare. Now there's over 200 million telehealth consultations. There's only one of the examples. But what's the leadership lesson that comes from this? It's always good to have a plan, but circumstance will dictate how and when it can be implemented. And your job as current and emerging leaders is to understand that moment, to understand that opportunity. And then, and I saw the way Kate was able to do this, to seize that opportunity and say, now is that moment when the door opens. And that's what leadership is. Yes, to have a plan, but to be able to adapt that plan to events and circumstances. As a former British Prime Minister said, when confronted with a plan, he says, yes, plans are wonderful, but it's events, dear boy, events which determine the course and life of a government. And it's the same thing in all of our domains, that it's essential and indispensable to have that plan. But it's even more important to be able to understand when is the moment and what is the opportunity, and then have the courage to make that decision. So I guess I did cheat slightly, Ashish, but you did ask me to rev the crowd up. I can see that they're just cheering. They're incredible. But that is a bit of our common story, in the sense of how does something which has transformed all the way we all do business, the way we all operate, with 200 million consultations and a paradigm shift, which then enables the great transformation of digital health, of remote sensing, and then the work of genomics and stem cells, arguably the four great thematics in health transformation, to have a platform in Australia and to see that history and to understand how it came to pass is to understand a little bit about how you make change in your time as you go forward over the coming decade. Thank you.
So I have another question, and this is probably for Wu. We'll start with you. Do you think leaders are born or are they forged?
I very much think that they are forged. I think, I'll give you the example. So when I was going through medical school, we'll talk about communication skills as just an example of something that people think that they're born with, the ability to communicate and articulate very well. And yes, there are some people who, due to their background, the way they've grown up and who they've grown up with, that impacts them. But in medical school for me, I went to Bond University on the Gold Coast. I was the third cohort to go through, right? So we didn't have much confidence because we were sitting there going, we're not, a sandstone university. We didn't have the pedigree that the UQs, the UNSWs, or even the Griffiths had. But one thing they really focused on us from the very first year was a focus on soft skills, on communication skills, on the ability to interact with patients, which is something that's incredibly important. And I've seen so many of my friends transform from first year medical school to now, where we are today. And I run a software business, where we sell hundreds of millions of dollars worth of software every year. If I could hire the best salespeople in the world, it would be actually the people I went to university with because they learned how to communicate. I use that as one example of the fact that these soft skills are things that I always thought were inherent and that you're born with and it's a product of your background. But when push comes to shove, like when Greg was saying, we learned to, adapt to telehealth in 10 days. When people are forced to be leaders, they actually step up to the plate and learn to be leaders. There are some who will shy away from it, and in many circumstances, that's a choice. But I think of my co-founder, Andrew Barnes. He's one of the best leaders I know. He's the CEO of Go1. We've known each other since we were kids, and I can guarantee you when we started out doing what we're doing Go1, he isn't the leader that he is today, right? He wasn't the leader that he is today. So I do think that is something that can be learnt, but it's not something that can be taught. Now, that's a bit of a weird thing, a nuance that I want to give you. Something that's taught is going, I'm going to sit down with you and I'm going to teach you how to be a leader. Whereas, but learning how to be a leader for me is actually, you've got to be out there in the cauldron. You've actually got to learn to do it, right? Medical school for me was, we could learn all the theory in the world, but actually it was in hospital, it's in clinical settings that you actually learn to be a doctor. And so for me, I do think that leadership is one of those things, and again, I've got a very biased point of view, but it's actually one of those things that can be learnt, but not necessarily taught.
So you're lucky because you got a head of genomics sitting right next to you. And, Lynn, do you really think it's an acquired skill, or is there something innate in our genetics which poses us and differentiates us from being a leader or getting skills which get us there, and the rest, the environmental factors just add the secret sauce?
Well, I don't think there's been a genetic study on what makes a leader, but I'd love to do that at some stage. I think there's a bit of everything that comes into it. I don't think it's so straightforward, and I'm not so sure that leadership can't be taught either. I think one of the most important things is to take young people that have some potential there. Maybe they're a bit shy, maybe they stay back from responsibility, but if you give them an opportunity and you mentor them and show them the way, I think that's the way to actually teach. So I think there's two sides. I don't think everybody can be a leader, though. I think you do need people who are willing to take that opportunity, willing to take that responsibility, and willing to work with a team. And I think we've got to remember, too, there are different types of leaders. They're not all autocratic. Some of them work with the strengths of their team. Some of them are great communicators. Some of them are inherent with wonderful brain, original, innovative ideas, and maybe do it all on their own. So I think we have to embrace all the different types of leadership because we're a pretty small country and we really need to be growing what we're actually doing in terms of industry and outcomes and manufacturing. So I think we want to embrace all of these styles. But my thoughts are we need to encourage and really mentor people who have an inclination and who have an opportunity to become leaders, like you people, down the track.
Kate, what do you think? You started politics as a very young person and you wanted to drive a change, and you probably had something in you which had that flame and fire to do that. Do you think you could get an MBA at QUT and become a leader, or go to INSEAD and, you know, become a leader? Is that something which the business schools teach you, or do they just teach you traits to get to this level where you can manage organizations and manage conflict and, you know, think of things?
I think just reflecting on the comments, which actually they were complimentary, not is I think for me personally, I guess I'll start there before I get, of course, come to QUT and study an MBA and become an amazing leader. But for me, it was this always young, I always sorted it out, like whether it was like lead in the choir, on the school council. The minute I could nominate to be on the school council in year 5, I did. Like, to me, it was always chasing opportunity. And I've heard a lot since I've been on the Tech Council of Australia, and you hear this, and you'll hear this in lots of motivational speeches. Like, in the world today, where we're going to see so much more automation of basic skills and those kind of things, I think that natural inclination for curiosity. I mean, you wouldn't be sitting here today if you didn't have that, right? And I think for me, having leadership opportunities and challenging yourself just meant that you would be doing more interesting things. Like, I think it just always opened up new doors and new experiences and left you with a deeper understanding than if you were like, I'm just gonna be really honest here. Like, I always, like, the ones that don't want to be the leader, I just never understood that, because it's like going, then you get to meet everyone and you get to experience the whole thing. Like, I think that's what leadership can open up doors to. But I loved your comment around the different types of leaders. And having been, I'm sure Greg can talk about this, we've seen a few different types of leadership styles in our time. Some I wouldn't recommend, but the ones where empowering others, seeing the skills, being brave to surround yourself with brighter people than yourself, always seeking that room, that's when the magic happens. And that's when, if you are the person that's sitting in the big chair and you create an environment where everyone is firing and the sum of those decision makings is so much better, that's when I think as a leader you have those moments where you go, when you get a natural high, because you know that the decision you made is going to have a greater outcome and everyone contributed. That's to me is when magic happens in leadership.
Chris, you know, you're one of the best leaders I know, and I say this wholeheartedly. But one of the biggest challenges which we all face when you run big organizations is change. Because inherently, every organization, every fund, VC fund, PE funds, everyone is risk averse. And especially in medicine, we run this life, which we are on train tracks where we are risk averse. Yes, we want to innovate, yet we want to change this behemoth train, which is heading or veering off in the wrong direction. How have you navigated your journey? And, you know, are there any light bulb moments as to how you can drive things from this perspective, from within the organization, where you think as a leader, this is not the direction I want to be in, and this train's just veering off? What do we do?
I guess my course of leadership came from frustration. And I think that's probably where we want to do better. And we want to, all those little things that frustrate you, you want to change. So you try and make little changes that go towards improving something. And as a nurse at the bedside, initially it was probably about making 10 forms into one in an emergency department. So you get rid of half the clutter. So I guess change is inevitable, and you just have to live with it, and you just have to get on with it. And you get bored when things don't change, I think. And people love something new, mostly. Sometimes you have to kind of coach them around it, but they do. And, you know, I think it's always about the why you're doing it, as opposed to we're just going to do it, and talk to them. And sometimes what you think is going to work is not going to work, and be honest about that. Say, I got it wrong. So I guess don't be afraid of it. Just get on and have a go. And if you're wrong, then that's okay too. And I think we all need to embrace that, and we all need to be cognizant, I guess, of people's ability to make a mistake, because we all do that. And I think that's how change happens, and sometimes happens when you don't expect it to.
Greg, I've always thought that one of the big things for all of us is the soft skills, which Wu was talking about, and I don't really know if they're soft or hard skills, is conflict resolution. And I think one of the big things which, as you rise in your profession or you rise in your organization, you become a conflict manager more, and it takes away a lot of your time and energy. But more importantly, you're in a situation where some tough decisions have to be made at a certain point of time in life, and the flow is going against you. How do you stick your ground in terms of what the central core mission of an organization is, despite where it's heading? And how do you resolve or mitigate conflict in that kind of a situation? So you're probably quite well poised in that situation. And is there any tools which you have used or any strategy which you have used in the situation to help in conflict resolution and negotiations as a leader?
Sure. So look, the first thing is leaders are, to use Vu's term, I think, forged, not born. Anybody has the capacity, and you can be outgoing, you can be more introverted. Actually, in Myers-Briggs terms, I'm very close to the centre on the extrovert-introvert. I find my own company stimulating, and we're all on a different spectrum. And the second thing is that to be outstanding in almost any discipline, whether it's soccer, whether it's biomechanics, whether it's joint surgery, there's a pretty golden rule in the world that it's about 10,000 hours of focused activity. And, you can argue one way or another, but it's that intense focused activity and time. That's what university is about. That's what professional training, to be able to say, not just go through the motions, but always to be personally focused of, this is hard. How am I improving? But am I pushing myself? So then in terms of leadership, there are multiple different styles. But I think that the three elements for me, and your job is to listen to all sorts of different people and say, I like that, and I don't like that. That idea from Greg was really bad. But the things that I see, first is that leadership is a dialogue. Is it top down, or are you merely a cipher of the people whom you're representing? The answer is, in my view, it's a dialogue. And that is, you have to be able to give views, but you have to be able to really openly receive views. I don't mean go through the motions of listening. It's, what are they saying? What are my constituents saying? Gee, that's an interesting idea. What are the constituents within the portfolio saying? And inevitably, that's where you harvest ideas. Sometimes you'll come up with them yourselves, but mostly you'll be listening and say, that's the right one. So it's that active engagement and listening. That's the dialogue part of leadership. The second, though, is then you have to be able to really summarise. For me, I found that's when I retreated to being alone and would write things down, to take all the ideas and to put them on paper and say, no, this is the structure, and to be able to share it, test that structure. But ultimately, during the pandemic, we said that there were two great tasks, containment and capacity. Containment was about reducing the number of cases, and capacity was about increasing them. And containment was borders, testing, tracing, and distancing. And to be able to have that structure guided the way we operated as a government and as a country. But then the third element is communication. How do you take all of that and summarise it in a way that people feel they can be part of? And I think you'll all remember, for better or worse, flattening the curve. And flattening the curve does sound like something that Weight Watchers would talk about. But in the end, it was the idea that we had to reduce the cases to be less than our capacity. So we had to make sure that we had enough ventilators and enough capacity in the system, but sufficiently few cases. And so those three elements, leadership is a dialogue, the planning, which ultimately you have to be able to listen, but you've got to own it yourselves. Can I put it down on paper in a way that people can understand? And then to communicate. Those would be the three elements. Styles, approaches, they're all individual. But so long as you're generous to others through the dialogue, then each of you will be able to manage it.
So did you see how he did it? I asked him a question as to how to avoid conflict, and he didn't talk about conflict at all. He didn't talk about how he would resolve a conflict at all.
Well, he kind of did talk about conflict, because you can avoid conflict by having active listening, I think. And I think, so I was going to say, like, I think that's one of the things, like in our world, in any world, you get conflict when there isn't a genuineness in the interaction about genuinely understanding. And I think the more generous you can be with your thinking and your listening, the better decisions you make, and you can avoid conflict. Because conflict, I'm in rugby league now. Someone's joking about, like, lots of conflict in rugby league. That's because every man in that room and these men are all right. So I think what I've gone into there with is, like, I'm going to listen, actively listen, and then you get facts. And when you've got the right facts, no one can beat you in an argument.
No one can beat Kate in an argument in rugby league. Important thing what Greg said is, 10,000 hours of learned behavior, and we've practiced that through surgery. I never counted the hours in. I don't know if it's 10 or 9 or what it is, but I think what you're actually saying is you got to work bloody hard. Yeah. That's what he's basically alluding to. So Vu, do you think unicorns can be built on a work-life balance? Do you think that number of 40 hours per week or something for young people who want to have ambition or who want to achieve stuff, if you dream big and if you are a leader and if you want to achieve big, do you think those rules apply?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we approach problems, when I say we, I mean myself, my co-founders, we've been together for 17 years. So it's a long time we've been together. But the way we approach problems is really simple. We don't ask the question, can we do something? We ask, how do we, right? And that's something that's always been really important. I think, Kate, you've heard me speak about this before. Because if I ask you the question, can we do something? The answer is usually binary. It's a yes or no. If I ask you, how do we do something? What have we already assumed? The answer is yes. We just got to figure out how. And the way I'm answering your question here is actually coming back to going, yeah, the answer is yes. You can have your work-life balance, whatever else it might be, but you've still got to figure out how, right? So the example I'd give you is that as we were building our company back in the day, Andrew got a Rhodes Scholarship. He went to Oxford. We had to figure out how to make that work. So why does Go1 have a London office? Because Andrew went to the UK, he went to Oxford. Chris did law at Griffith University. He got to clerk for the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in South Africa. So why does Go1 have a Johannesburg office? Because Chris went to South Africa and had the opportunity to do that. So we've always thought it and I did my medical degree, I did the training under you at the same time that we were growing Go1. And so for me, one, I'm very fortunate in that I've got some great co-founders. But the second part of it is that we've always approached problems as going, how do we have our cake and eat it too? Now, if you've got the willingness to try and think hard and trying to adapt, problem solve, and even compromise, then I think you can. But I think the challenge that it comes back to is that everyone doesn't always want to compromise on things. Everyone doesn't always want to work that little bit harder, right? Do a 60-hour week instead of a 40-hour week, or go, actually, I'm going to build something that's going to be smaller or less impactful or whatever it might be. So it's a roundabout way to be able to say to you, yes, if you can actually think hard enough to figure out how to do it, and no, if you're not willing to do that, which I think is an important part. And again, a lot of the time it's a choice. I do think about solo founders, and I take my hat off to them, because, as I said, I wouldn't have been able to do any of the things that I've had the opportunity to do if I didn't have my fellow co-founders. And a lot of the time when you found a company or when you build a company, like, we're in online learning. COVID made a very big difference to online learning in the workplace. Suddenly, we went from March 2020 thinking our business was going to die to all of a sudden going, we didn't have enough staff, enough people to be able to cater for what was coming through the door. And Greg, as you said before, like with telehealth, you don't really turn back, right? When you find a more efficient, more effective way of doing things, you've suddenly had that taste and you want to do more of it. So I share that with you because for us, as we went through that sort of change, we've always had to think, how do we cope with it? How do we deal with it? Not can we? Because that immediately makes us problem solve.
Chris, how do we tackle, short-term goals as an opportunity versus a long-term vision for an organization. You've transitioned to an organization in a very powerful position. And what I've often seen is I talk to a lot of CEOs and meet a lot of people, and often people just get bogged down by their financials and their KPIs and the balance sheet and the forecasts. There's very few people, we call them visionaries, or who look at organizations and say, well, this is where I think we're going to be in 15 years. This is where I think we're going to be in 10 years. And surprisingly, those people are far and few between. They're not there, that many. So how do you realize or navigate that in terms of setting a mission statement for your organization or a long-term vision versus meeting the board's deadlines with short-term goals?
That's a tricky one, because I guess we all get bogged down in day to day, don't we? And we forget about what we're actually there for. And so for me, each day I try to go for a walk and see a patient. I think that's so important, because that actually grounds you and you think, okay, that's why we're here, aren't we? To have a little wander, walk through the ED yesterday, it was a disaster. So I guess it's really around thinking, okay, I've got to deal with the day-to-day, but there's got to be room for strategy in there. And now it's really difficult, I guess, moving into a coup role as opposed to an actual on-the-ground management position, being able to make sure that I'm still in touch with the people who are doing the work and the patients, because they're the most important part of what we do. So I guess by talking to them and seeing if we've got the conditions right and manipulating those conditions, that will help inform the strategy. And I'd much rather build a strategy from the ground up than from the top down. So we're just starting to do a bit of work on that. There's also that whole thing about one size doesn't fit all. So a big facility in Brisbane does not suit a small facility in Bundaberg. So I guess it's around making sure you have the rationales and the strategy, but each individual facility needs to have their own way of doing it. And don't be caught up on how they do it, as long as we all get there in the end. So I guess that's a bit of a tricky one, Ashish, but yes, you've got to stay clear and focused about what you're doing.
Is there any questions from the audience for all our not so good leaders, as they put it? Manu.
I think just to move points, I think being an entrepreneur, the biggest struggle, I think you did touch on that, and I love the way you articulated about how to balance. But it's very hard to balance between family and business when you're so passionate and love what you do, and then switching on and switching off mode, especially when you get home of an all day of that. I want to know that your journey initially, especially having family and kids and stuff and balancing it all, I haven't got a clear-cut answer. You try to justify in your head how to do it. I learned, go home and don't switch off. So to switch on to a different mode. Did it work? Because you're still going through your day. What's your take on that, on how to handle that?
So managing your own headspace, just to answer your question, I think is the most important thing. You can't be an effective father, partner, business leader, mentor, whatever it is that you're doing if you're not in the right headspace. So, for me, I get asked by people all the time, I'm going to go see patients on Thursday. I always see my patients on Thursday. I've not skipped a beat when it's come to general practice and seeing my patients once a week. And people ask me, why do you do it? Do you do it to maintain your registration, your hours? And the honest answer I give them is really quite simple. I do it for me. Because those 5 or 6 hours that I'm in a session seeing patients, I can't check my phone. I can't jump on an email. I can't do any of those things. I actually have to deal with the person in front of me. And I work in a large bulk billing clinic. So as soon as one patient walks out, guess what? The next one's waiting ready to see me. And so if you've ever practiced mindfulness before, for me, it's a weird form of enforced mindfulness. The second part of it is I will walk out on Thursday night. If you talk to me at 8 o'clock on Thursday night, I will have had a terrible day because my patients will have experienced something terrible at some point, inevitably. For 6 hours, you will run into patients who experience something terrible. And then I remind myself going, actually, my life's pretty good. Because whatever problem I'm having in Go 1 that week, a client issue, an employee issue, it is nothing compared to what my patient has gone through on that Thursday. And so I wake up Friday morning going, excellent. I haven't checked my email for 6 hours. Second part is that I'm actually really grateful for the opportunities I have. And the third part is it's Friday. So for me, I think, it's a bit of a vague answer, but I do think a big part of it is actually managing your headspace. For us as founders, when we actually got better at managing our own headspace and actually working together, the organisation accelerated. It made a really big difference.
Maybe a question for Kate and Greg. You've lived a public life in front of cameras and, 24/7, everything you do and say and stuff is there. How do you create that space for yourself and achieve that balance?
Well, actually, it's funny you asked that question because I was just picking up what you said. I feel like for the people in the room that are sort of embarking on this journey that kind of forces you into the reality of that balance because you can't survive if you don't have strategies. Like I'm still the only woman in the history of Queensland to have a baby while serving as a minister. And 13 years ago when my son was born, as a feminist, I thought, look, I'm creating this whole new opportunity for all these women to follow in my footstep. They haven't. And they haven't because it's bloody hard. I think my advice would be is to get that headspace of who's talking about it's trial and error. Like you will work out what works for you. It's recognizing that you actually do need to have some balance, and balance is different for everyone. And the balance is, I hate that word actually, but it's like I can function and highly function and all the things I want to be highly functioning at on this many hours sleep and this much exercise per week. It's actually just being deliberate and meaningful. Like you wouldn't be in this room if you weren't deliberate and meaningful to get you here, right? It's deliberate and meaningful about your welfare so you can actually fire on all cylinders. And I think that's different for every single person. I've realized now that I've left politics and I've been in the real world for 3 years, is that I just have a natural ability to go, I'm switching off now. I need sleep, I need this, I will be so much better in 2 hours if I go do this. Like I think the ability, and I know so many of my friends that cannot do that. Like they are very anxious people and they cannot just go, right now, I have no more that I can give on this to right at this moment. I'm going to go away, as Greg said, I'm going to write down my thoughts and I'm going to come back to that. I think that ability to just really understand how you function best is trial and error, but you'll get to a position where that becomes natural, that this is what I have to do in order to be better for everybody else that's relying on me to do my job.
So to draw on two things that Vu and Kate said. Vu mentioned effectively he steps out of himself when he's being a GP. And Kate has talked about understanding yourself. She also mentioned NRL before. There's a game in the southern states called AFL. Some of you may be aware of it. Brisbane actually has a team in the women's grand final this weekend. One of the more famous players from my team, Richmond, is Dustin Martin. Distinctive hairstyle, some body art, and he has no real capacity to be anonymous in Victoria. This is like probably the most identifiable person in Victoria because of all of those elements. And he says that, his happy space is when he's on the field because he's totally immersed in the moment. And you'll hear that from sports people, actors. My experience is people say, would you get nervous before a speech? Oh, sometimes. But once I'm there, I'm in the moment. And all the distractions slip away, and it's that total focus on the engagement and the substance coming together. Now, the point of all of this is it's about finding yourself, and there's a difference between what you do and who you are. And what you do, for me, like Kate, had an imagined story of my life at an early age through 3 basic phases of platform and the preparation, then the parliamentary, which was 21 years, and then now I've just started the third stage, which is the portfolio. 1 pillar academic, 1 philanthropic, 1 pillar commercial, and to know that story. But the real essence for me, and it's only my version of it, is what are the abiding elements of who I am? And it wasn't being a parliamentarian. The question was, would I be okay once I left? Actually, completely fine. But I didn't know. But it's the four abiding elements of my life are the family and friends and having those connections on a daily basis, the values, trying to live out the things that I think are of meaning and worth as part of my life, and that's more human engagement than anything else. The creative, I can't sing or dance or paint. I can speak a little and write a little, so I try to get those into the day. And then the physical, and the physical is about the outside world, but also the challenge. A great day is when I can combine all four of those. And so to have that sense of the story and the phases, but the identity is actually not the job. And it takes a bit of courage to realise that, but it's the abiding elements of what is it that makes you yourselves.
My take on this, Manu, is one thing you have to learn is to say no. And I've changed myself because I couldn't say no. And being an orthopedic surgeon has been a blessing or a disguise because I have one neuron, and that one neuron can only do one thing at a time. So one thing I've learned to do in my life is when I'm doing something, I'm just doing that. For me, the happy space is when I operate. People find surgery stressful. I actually don't find surgery stressful at all. Because when I'm operating, I'm in this happy space which woos in. But how do you translate that from the operating room to when you go home? And I've done the same thing with Gina, and I've done the same thing with my kids. When I'm with them, I'm with them. Now, it might be 5 minutes or it might be 10 minutes, but I'm with them. The same thing happens with Akuna. And, people come and say, okay, Ashish, and I'm like, I can't deal with this right now. I'll talk to you in 2 hours, or I'll talk to you tomorrow. But when I'm with you, I'm going to give you my 110% because your productivity is much better. Often what happens is we're always on the phone. There's texts going, there's stuff happening here and there, and you're giving 5% here, 5% there, 10% there, and your head's just spinning. So for me, the practical thing I've done, and a lot of people would testify to this, that even now people said, can we talk about this student and stuff? I'm like, no, I'm not doing it today. I'm going to do it next week. And I'm going to give you 20 minutes or half an hour, and we're going to discuss this, and it'll be productive. So that's one take from my 2 cents, which has helped. We're running short.
And by the way, this is also why Ashish is known as the singing surgeon.
Another thing I want to pitch to now is we've got a lot of innovators and young people here. And the question to Lynn especially is, we're at this foothills of Asia, which is 4 billion people sitting there. And there's a lot of dreams in this room and a lot of ambition in this room from young researchers. How do we convert this innovation into something which we can actually commercialize? And Wu can pitch into this as well as to what kind of an environment is there, or what can we do better to bring all this innovation and these ideas which we have now into the commercial world. And with the Bridge Tech program, you've really helped us, and we've had a lot of people join Akuna through the Bridge Tech program. So maybe especially for the young PhDs and students here, what's your take on it?
Well, I think the first thing is to really learn as much as you can. So obviously you're in that 10,000 hours at the moment, so you're becoming experts in your area. I think the second thing is to be open and creative and innovative. So not getting caught up in all the emails and all the lists of things that all need to be done yesterday, but leaving that time for you to come up with creative ideas. And then the next thing is, okay, you've got something here. It's being brave enough to take that forward. So work out the best way to do it. Is it on my own? Is it with co-founders? Is it with another industry partner? What is it? What should you be doing? Is it a startup that you should be doing? Is it an idea where you should be working with someone else because maybe you don't have all of those skills? Work out, have I got a great idea here? How do I work out how to take that forward? And then just being brave enough to do it. At the moment, I think the climate in Australia is really supportive of going forward and setting up startups. It could be you don't know how, so how would you do that? As a PhD student, there's lots of opportunities now to work with industry. So there's APR internships, there's other sorts of placements and internships, and I'd strongly recommend taking those opportunities. There's a lot of various boot camps, entrepreneurship programs. Do that while you're a PhD student, because this is the knowledge to tell you how to go about it. And yes, the Bridge and the Bridge Tech programs sit in that space as well. So get that knowledge, work out what you're going to do, and then work out how to do it. If you're beyond that stage of being a PhD student, you're a postdoc. Again, there are all sorts of industry placements. The Ready Fellowships have been fantastic. We've had Bridge and Bridge Tech Ready Fellowships, and there are larger ones where you get to not just meet industry or have a short placement, but you can have even extended placements. These give you the ideas, they give you the networks and the connections, and you'll find out how to actually go forward and start that journey of commercialisation. I wouldn't be afraid of it. It's an opportunity. If you don't do it when you're young and you're brave, you'll keep putting it off and you'll start supporting other people doing it. So I think this is your time, seriously. This is when you're really at your brightest, you're most creative, and you've got those opportunities. So take the risks. And I really think at the moment, as I've said, there's ways you can learn, there's placements and networks you can get, and there's also funding for startups too. So get familiar, find out what's available, and just go on that track. But get to know people who've done it. How did they do it too? So strongly supportive of doing this, but be brave and take opportunities and be creative.
So the Queensland
Well,
government...
would you do it any different? Like, I'll just,
Yep.
you know, from where you were 8 years ago
Yep.
to where it is now, is there
We should have
more
done it.
support? Is
So,
there more support?
there's
Would
two
you do
thing-
anything differently?
There's two things I'll bring up. One is that Go One started at the right time. Advanced Queensland came under your department and your leadership was something that was incredibly important because government is there to help, right? And it's shone, here in Queensland in particular, and I think more so than any other state, we've shone the light on it. We've got the Venture Capital Development Fund, which QIC is administering at the moment. That's $75 million, which is going to be matched 125%.
I did ask for 150.
I know,
but yeah.
I know. But it's going to be matched with by 125% with venture capitalist money. That is $169 million that's going to be deployed over 4 or 5 years into early stage Queensland startups. Like that's huge. That's $40 million a year over a 4 or 5 year deployment period. So to what you're saying there, this is the right time to do it. Your question about what would I do differently or how would I do it differently? We're actually really disappointed because we think we should have gotten to where we are now in half the time. And I think that's a really important thing. Every company or everyone can claim to be innovative, but the important thing is execution and speed, right? When you're a disruptor, speed is your weapon. You've got to move fast. And the challenge that it comes back to is usually that speed is actually created internally, that urgency is created intrinsically. Knowing no one's going to crack the whip and get you to move faster, that's going to come from yourself. So there's two things I'd put out there. To your point you were saying before, this is the right time to start a business, to start a startup, but that urgency needs to be created. My co-founders are always turning around and talking to each other and we're always just saying, we are moving too slow. We don't have enough urgency because that's the bit that we're always sitting on the edge of our seat going, someone is just chasing us, someone is just behind us. Or to be able to catch up to the incumbents, we have to move faster. Now, that can result in some bad things sometimes, but ultimately I think that is the only weapon that a startup has, an early stage company has.
Ashish, I must just say, hot off the press, for those that haven't caught up, yesterday the federal government did actually, which I have the little paper here, the Industry Growth Program. So that's almost $400 million for startups. So there's grants up to $250 for early stage and then up to $5 million in support for businesses that are scaling up. So if you are in that situation right now, then you should actually look at the Industry Growth Program. So that was announced yesterday, and it's one of the things that we've been lobbying really hard as the Tech Council, as you spoke about in your opening remarks, around the fact that so many amazing brains, so many great ideas, but translating that and supporting that. And I think there's more awareness now, certainly at a Queensland level, but nationally, that for a country of our size, with the capital, like we've only had, like 20 unicorns in the last, we're 180 unicorns now in Australia compared to the capital that's available in other countries. So if a government wants to support the best brains in their country, then we are a country that can afford to be interventionist and put these kind of programs in to support the best brains to actually commercialise those ideas. Now is the time to do it. I'd echo the other panellists, but now there's even more funding, and please go online and have a look.
Any questions? Can we get a mic?
28 unicorn companies.
There you go.
You're on the way up.
Thank you so much.
Start of a horn.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm Olumide, Bridge Tech Fellow and Go One customer. My question is regarding business training. How did you acquire business training while going through your doctoral studies? Thank you.
In terms of how do we acquire business training, how do we, in terms of ourselves and as founders, yeah, to Greg's point, what we're talking about in terms of leadership, sort of in medicine, see one, do one, teach one. That's probably the best thing to think about. So for me, no one in Queensland or no one in Australia had really built an online learning company that has scaled globally. So we couldn't really see one. So we just had to do one, right? And so I think that's an important thing. It's learn by doing, trial and error. That's what I mean by speed. You know, you can sit there and think about it and pontificate about it as much as you want to, but until you put it in practice, that's where you're going to learn whether or not it can fly or not. So my 2 cents that it comes back to is you just got to go out there and do it. Have as many conversations. You mentioned mentorship before. Have as many conversations as you can possibly, but don't let that stop you from actually trialing things in the wild, because again, that's where you're going to actually get the most ROI in terms of the time and effort. When I talk to founders, I say to them, the more time you waste on a bad idea is the less time you have to work on the next good idea. And so at the end of the day, by testing out in the wild, it also has that concept of fast failure as well.
So my favourite author is John Irving. And John Irving wrote A Prayer for Owen Meany, The World According to Garp, Cider House Rules. And there's a little bit in the frontispiece to his books, which said, I decided to become an author when a lecturer at university said to me, unless you become an author, unless you try it, and you may fail, anything else will feel vaguely dissatisfying. And so that's really about this notion of, for me, and I suspect for Kate as well, the way we were wired, each of us would have felt as if we'd missed something if we hadn't taken the risk of running for Parliament and being in Parliament. And we were lucky enough to leave on our own timing rather than the more common death, defeat, disgrace, disappointment. You know, our goal was to leave with a modicum of dignity, and in Kate's case that's yes, in mine, you know, still to be determined. But the real point there is, what is it that really, you know, going back to makes you you, and what do you have to do to try to be that person? And so that's taking the risk of failure, but it's no problem not to succeed. It's more of a problem not to try. And so you just got to put yourself out there and have a crack.
I think those are good last words, because I think we're running out of time. I think from here, what if I could summarize it. Is there a question? Tristan? Oh yeah, sorry, go for it.
So obviously lots of different perspectives and experiences here across the panel. One of the things I think that's come out is that there's a lot of balancing. Thank you. There's a lot of, when you're considering what you want to do and you're planning and thinking, you need to examine your internal values and identify what's important to you and how you want to approach that and make those decisions. One thing that I struggle with personally is going through the process of identifying those values to inform those decisions. So I was wondering if you had any insights on how each of you might approach that process, or how, you know, you talked about some of your early experiences in childhood that might inform that. How do you look back on that and then use those experiences moving forward?
So I actually thought about this in the last few years. So I had been working in a company, a for-profit company, for 22 years. And I kind of got to the point, we'd gone through COVID, tough years, time for a change. And I was thinking, what sort of change? What would make me really happy, you know? And so I kind of started writing words down, and I got a coach to help me do that. And it was about values, and try and work out what are those values that really hit right there. You know, what are the things that float your boat and make you feel good about yourself? And so I think it's about having a little battle, and they change. Like it took a long time to kind of, and they change, they still change. But you've got to find those things that connect you and you as a person, and work out, how do I find the right opportunity for me? And you'll get to that point where you think, okay, this feels right. And that's where your values are. Yeah.
I might just follow up on that one too. And I think everybody here seems so much more organised than me, all sitting down and writing down what's their most important things here. But I think my own personal area is to just really try and work out what's the most important thing to you. Maybe not all of the things, but what's the most important thing? If you think about working as an example, you're going to spend an awful lot of your life working. So you really want to do something you like, and you really want to do something that you think is meaningful and that you're prepared to put time in. So I tend to put that right up front. Yes, you want to have balance, and you certainly want to have a family, and you definitely want to sleep at night and go for walks along beaches. Everyone has to work out that balance side. But if you think about what's your meaning in terms of your career, that's tricky at your age. You've got to work out what's the most important thing for you. What do I really care about? And then I think you've got to keep bringing yourself back to it, because the world will try and take you into different areas. Personally, I think I was probably geared up more onto the leadership side, whereas I'm more a research side that I actually prefer. And you have to kind of bring yourself back to your true values at some stage too. So write it down, but work out what it really is. Maybe a lot of long walks will get there, or whatever.
I think it's been, Simon Sinek said this, and I think it's a very important point which was discussed, that there was a difference in value proposition from people who were born before 2000 to people who were born after 2000, and even a more different value proposition for people who were born after 2010. And in my little experience with dealing with people who, I'm like the oldest part of the company now, is money doesn't drive people, or money doesn't drive you all. Purpose drives you all, and values drive you all. So when you move forward in life, it's very important to find like-minded people who share the same values. And if you find those people in life who share the same values, then the rest is just a joyride. You will succeed. But if you find an organization where the values and the purpose and your mission in life does not coincide, or the value of that organization is moving, it doesn't matter how much money they're going to give you, you will not be happy. So the aim in life is to know within yourself, this is what my purpose is, this is what my value set is, and then go around and identify with like-minded people, and then the rest will be fun. So I think on that note, I'd really like to thank everybody for the panel. Big round of applause for everybody.